All right, so Mr. Gerber here, going over kind of a rehash of kind of what we talked about during our introduction day here at Assembly High School for AP Human Geography, but also going to go in depth with some things that we didn't really get to talk about in class and are also covered in the book. They're basic geographic terms and ideas, so stuff that we've covered a little bit, things we haven't mentioned yet. They're just kind of in that first section. So hopefully you've taken a look at that. If not, this video kind of hopefully gives you a little more depth to it and a little more understanding of it. And then, yeah, we're going to talk about just kind of some things related to it. So this is stuff you're not really going to find too much on the AP exam. There might be one or two questions. They don't really focus on these specific things, but again, these are good understandings to just kind of understanding maps and just overall geography. So our actual definition of what is human geography, okay, so because geography itself is a very overreaching term for everything that we talk about in class. So we have our definition here of physical geography, so study of spatial characteristics of the physical environment, so things like weather, climate, ecosystems, physical features, so things like within Inver Grove Heights, such as our own climate, our temperature, the various ecosystems that live here. Next year when you take biology, you'll learn more obviously about said ecosystems here. Physical features like our hills, the Mississippi River, the lakes and ponds in the area, things like that. Kind of all fit in within just the physical aspect. But that can also overarch and connect itself to the human geography, which is spatial characteristics of humans and humans' activities. So this covers a wide variety of things, such as where humans live, reasons we migrate, where we migrate to, how we migrate, health, including birth and death rates, life expectations, poverty, income, religion, language, agriculture, development, wealth distribution, urban and suburban growth and issues, politics, societal structures. It is just so much information that we really get to cover in this class, and I really do love it. I really do, and I'm not just saying that because I teach it, but when you talk about courses that are really more about the day-to-day things that we actually have to deal with or things that come up in day-to-day life, human geography is very, very relevant within that. So a lot of the stuff that we talk about throughout the course is stuff that is going on either locally or globally in present day terms. So yeah, we talk about some historical things, but we also talk about a lot of current modern day examples and themes, and you will see that come up a lot throughout the entirety of the course. So this gives us that definition of human geography and how we're going to talk about that, also in relation in many cases to that physical environment, because that is a big determinant of a lot of these different things. All right, so we're going to kind of skip through here. Give me a second. So we kind of went over this kind of stuff. The reasons or the purposes of maps, the different types. This is stuff that we didn't really talk about, but it's, there. Map scale we looked at, a really cool GPS tracking. So mind you, the stuff in this presentation are a few years old. I haven't exactly updated some of these things, but this guy literally just turned on his GPS and tracked, and he went biking in places, was flying around, and turned it on and did all this just to do a message from Great Britain to stop Brexit, which we obviously now know to be continually happening, and just kind of again, it's on its final stages of actually happening, where Great Britain is breaking off from the European Union. But 4 or 5 years ago, that was a very relevant topic and was still something that was being discussed and talked about. We've looked at the different projections and the fact that maps lie, either intentionally or unintentionally. So we kind of had some fun with that on the first day. So feel free to go through this presentation and look more at that, because again, these types of projections, again, you'll find 1 or 2 questions on an AP exam and on the unit test related to projections. But again, it's just kind of more about distortions and relational things. All right. So we looked at the theme maps. Again, you feel free to take a better look at that, the different types of maps and representations on said maps. All right, how maps can lie. We've gone over all that. So really what we're getting at in this video within the new information is longitude and latitude. So we kind of had a question on that within the Nearpod. And so we want to make sure that we understand that geography gives us a sense of place and our whereabouts. And you don't really get any more specifics other than having longitude and latitude. That is what allows us to have specific locations and a way to measure that globally throughout the planet. So when you talk about GPS locations, and if you ever watch any of those Marvel movies and they give you a location and then it's like it shows it shows you longitude and latitude lines, which is really, really interesting. Especially like if you ever Captain America: Civil War, they do that a lot within the specific locations of like this one ship or Shield headquarters, things like that. You see that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Not exactly sure why they are that specific, but again, that's an example of where you see it. And so longitude and latitude gives us that specific sense of place within said meaning. All right, so which lines are longitude, which ones are latitude? All right, if you remember from the quiz from our Nearpod, okay, longitude is the one that was not the correct answer when I was showing you the opposite. So these lines are longitude, this is latitude. So longitude measures east to west, but the lines go north-south. So that can be a little bit confusing. Okay, the lines all connect themselves at the north and south pole, these imaginary lines. So if you actually were like up in space, you wouldn't see these lines. They do not physically exist, but it helps give us coordinates and directions. All right. So there are a bunch of these. There are 360 degrees, okay, measured in 180 degrees west and 180 degrees east. All right, based on, again, said location from the prime meridian, which runs through Greenwich, England, and then the other half through the international date line. All right, so lines of longitude are known as meridians. So these are, hence why it's the prime meridian is the big one that goes through the Greenwich. And so every 10 degrees or so, you kind of get these locations. And again, it goes only to 180 degrees of latitude, but there is no 180 degrees west or east. All right, it's just 180 degrees, just like there is only 0. And then you have 10 degrees, this 10 degrees west, this one 10 degrees east. All right, and so again, they are just connecting themselves at the poles. All right, so latitude, I always remember this way. I was taught this when I was student teaching. Latitude is flatitude, okay? Even though it measures north-south, okay, it goes, it goes up and down north-south, but it runs in an east-west direction going fully around the globe. And these do not intersect at all. So longitude lines all intersect at the north and south pole. Latitude lines do not touch each other whatsoever. And so the 0 line is the equator. All right, we measure these within parallel. So if you ever hear about like within the Korean War, or the borders of North and South Korea is at about the 38th parallel, that is the 38th parallel line, in this case, north on the globe. All right. So, you know, here in Minnesota, you might see a few of those that are like around, I think we're like around the 45th or 47th degree parallel. That all depends on where exactly you live. I run into a few of those signs at, you know, various, you know, park points. But anyway, so these measure north-south from the equator and cross at right angles. And again, these are just kind of, again, essential. So importance because using these specifically help us to identify things on maps and the GPS, and was essential for getting accurate exploration and telling time. So if you are, you know, a sailor from Great Britain, and you want to know what time it actually is in Britain while you are somewhere across the Atlantic or in the Pacific Ocean, having accurate measurements of this allows you to have accurate time and accurate travel. All right. So this becomes really, really essential. And, you know, in the past in class, you know, we've watched a video on this from PBS about the discovery of it and kind of how they made it a competition. The British Academy or British scientists wanted to figure this out. And, you know, it's a really cool story, but if you get time to look at it, there's a link for it here, how longitude was found. Because latitude was easy. That was easy to find mathematically. Latitude, not so much. But anyway. So Earth is made up of 360 degrees of longitude, and it rotates once a day around the sun. Every 15 degrees constitutes, or essentially constitutes, one time zone. That varies, obviously, by country. Some states, it runs oddly through different points. You know, some states it, you know, splits it in half. Other states want to be whole on it. You know, it's a whole mixture thing. Same thing with some countries. So by dividing 360 by 15, we get 24 hours in a day. So thus, every 15 degrees essentially equals one of our time zones. Okay, so not exactly sure why I have it on the Mercator projector here, but I guess I did at one point. Again, just so you can measure certain points on the globe. So again, here's our time zone, and again, it's not a perfect thing within time zones. Otherwise, you would have literally straight north-south lines. But again, that doesn't exist on it can only exist on a flat map, not on a round globe. But the idea is there to kind of keep things kind of in the middle. So you do see some parts in some states where you might be in one time zone, you get to a different part of a state, it's in another. Same thing with obviously much bigger countries such as the United States, Canada, Russia, all kind of following in line. But even a big country like China decides that they just want to have that one set time zone. So, yeah. Yeah, and then we'll finish up kind of here a little bit with place. So going into section 1.2, So place as defined in the textbook is a point distinguished on Earth by a particular characteristic. And that is as general as a definition that you're going to get. And so we determined place one of three ways. By its name, which is also known as a toponym, and we're going to do a little reading on that in class about toponyms and where names come from, and then kind of relational things with that. Then site and situation. So toponym is the name given to a place on Earth. Many cases or many places have several names based on ancestry and history. So Minnesota is the name given to our state. That is its toponym, but it could again go by different names. And think about, we determine how your house is located with GPS and specific coordinates, but it also has an address and a postal address. That's kind of how you know it. Places can be named for people, similar features to other places, origin of the settlers, things that are surrounded by it, and, again, can have multiple names, which is something we'll talk about more in class. The site is the physical characteristics of a place. So when we talk about the actual definition of a site factor, whether or not people should live there based on things like vegetation, water sources, climate, elevation, resources that are around it or not around it, whether or not somebody wants to live there. So all about that physical location is the site part, okay? So think about why would people settle on a hilltop or a mountain versus why would they want to live by a river? And think historically that people used to almost always settle along rivers and lakes historically, and we'll talk again more about that in class. Then we have modifications to a site that we can change that. Washington, D.C. was supposed to be sort of a middle ground when the country was first starting out, but it was a swampland when it was initially created. The original or the location of Washington, D.C. is based on a swamp. And so you had to modify the site to get to be the nation's capital. And then the other way to measure it, the third way to measure or kind of come up with a place is its relative location. That's the situation part. Okay, that is a relative location or how it's relative to someplace else. All right, that helps us find an unfamiliar place. Like Simley is just off Highway 52 next to the Inver Glen Library and Inver Hills Community College. Another way to relatively talk about that is that it's 5 minutes away from Inver Grove AMC and 10 minutes south of downtown St. Paul if you just go down 52. All right, so those are ways to kind of give people ideas of where Inver Grove is next to, or other ways that it could be in terms of relative location to something else. All right, if you just say Inver Grove is a suburb of Minneapolis and St. Paul, but you don't know where Minneapolis or St. Paul is, but it's like, well, if you say Minneapolis and St. Paul, that's a big area and there's a lot of different places. There's a suburb of Minneapolis, suburb of St. Paul, which side, north, south, east, west, things like that. But it also becomes really important to understand the importance of a location. New York City, in particular, becomes an important financial and trade location because it's so close to the Atlantic Ocean and also a really big number of rivers. The Hudson being one of the two rivers that kind of runs through New York. All right. And so you have this location that makes it really accessible for trade purposes, and that's why it gets built with settlements, and that's why a lot of the crux of the big institutions are in New York City based on those initial factors and building up around it. All right. So there's the Hudson. All right, kind of coming down here. There's Long Island Sound, and boom, you're right out to the Atlantic Ocean. So toponyms, like we said, we're going to continue on with that in class. But this is kind of a very good so this picture is a little bit old, but it relates to this issue here with this famous lake in Minneapolis. So that covers this first lesson on, again, things we've covered in class, but also longitude and latitude and why that's important, and just some very beginning things here from section 1.2. So we'll come back and we'll talk more about some of this stuff in class, and then we'll extend it into the next video as well. So if you have questions, as always, just let me know, and we can kind of cover some stuff in class or during those online sessions. Otherwise, I hope you found this information useful. Continue to read the textbook, and we'll kind of go from there. So hope you enjoyed and hope you got something out of it.